Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Kemi Badenoch, 42 votes. James Cleverly, 37 votes. And Robert Jenrick, 41 votes.
Oh, and with that gasp, James Cleverly was eliminated from the Conservative leadership race. I wonder if this counts as unfair dismissal under Labour's new rules. Hello, you're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm Stephen Carroll.
And I'm James Woolcock. Now, look, we're going to focus today on Labour's big workers' rights plan. We couldn't ignore the dramatic turn in the Conservative leadership race. It does seem like the party is on track to move towards the right.
Yeah, James Cleverly was the centrist candidate, and it did appear like support had been rallying behind him in recent weeks, hence the surprise there at that result of voting. It's now up to the Conservative Party members to make their choice between Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick. Plenty of time for that to play out, though. We won't have a result until the 2nd of November, so it's a story that we'll come back to before then.
But see, Stephen, while Westminster is focusing on that surprise result, the Labour government is unveiling its flagship employment rights bill. Now, this is a big deal. It names 28 major reforms, including restricting zero-hours contracts, boosting sick pay, and protecting employees from unfair dismissal. So will it make a difference to workers?
Well, our Associate Editor Ailbhe Rea has been following this story and she joins us now with the details of it. Ailbhe, first of all, how big a deal is this policy package for the Labour Party? How important is it for them?
I was in Westminster yesterday for that result. Everyone was completely surprised. James Cleverly had been the front runner 2 days before and then 24 hours later was knocked out. And now the Conservative Party, no matter what happens, is going to have a leader from the right of the party. So really quite extraordinary, and everyone in Westminster is still a bit bewildered and almost giddy at the madness of it. But I mean, you ask how big a deal is it for Labour? I guess it depends who you ask. This is a massive package, and it has been in the works since 2021 when Angela Rayner, back in opposition, years before Labour got elected, as deputy leader, unveiled what she called the New Deal for Working People, a really sweeping package with about 70 different measures to improve workers' rights in the UK. And this has been very important to quite a few Labour MPs, lots of Angela Rayner's allies, and it's very important to the trade union movement. So for a lot of people in the Labour Party, like, this is what a Labour government is for as a top priority. It would be meaningless to be in power if you weren't going to use it for something like this. Probably for other people in the Labour Party, having promised this back in 2021, they are now slightly regretting making it such a big part of their policy platform. Back in 2021, Angela Rayner promised that if they had a Labour government, they would deliver the New Deal within 100 working days. 3 years on, they've actually had to do that. And they have managed to produce this bill, the Employment Rights Bill, within 100 days of being elected. But as we'll probably come on to discuss, that's far from a done deal. A lot of this won't actually come into place until 2026. And of those initial 70 proposals that Angela Rayner set out years ago, a lot of them have changed in the time since. There's been a lot of bartering between trade unions and businesses, and just, I guess, doing the work of taking things from these bold promises delivered in a speech to things drawn up by staff members, and then taking it to something that you can implement in government and put into law. That's been quite a big process. Not all of them have made it into the law, but Labour is also outlining today plans to deliver all the other things that aren't in the legislation that might come even later, or it might not be legally binding. So yes, it's been on a big journey since then.
So let's get down to brass tacks then, because like you say, there's some big promises here. I just want to run through a few of them with you. So what will happen, for example, to zero-hours contract, which has been a sticking point for Labour here?
Yeah, so I think you're completely right, James. This is essentially the only way to talk about this massive package. There's so many things in it. They could be a law each on their own, really. So the only way is to do it one by one. So on zero-hours contracts, this is one of the big original promises to ban zero-hours contracts, which are basically working arrangements at the moment where an employee can be on a contract that doesn't guarantee them any minimum hours. This sort of got quite a lot of press attention a few years ago, and around 2021 when the New Deal was first announced, there were lots of stories of employees technically being employed places but not actually getting any work and then being unable to work elsewhere. So Angela Rayner pledged that she would ban this. And in the time since, that has been a bit watered down, where essentially Labour has had to reckon with the fact that, I mean, I should say also that it's not just Angela Rayner involved anymore, it's also the business secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, who's done a lot of the business engagement and is leading this through the House of Commons. But in the time since, they've basically had to reckon with the fact that some workers do actually want a 0 hours contract and they like the flexibility. And also, you know, a 0 hours contract isn't actually a legal term. So essentially, what they've brought in is now a right for an employee to request a contract which guarantees minimum hours based on a 12-week reference period. So if you have been in a situation where you regularly work 20 hours a week for a restaurant, but the restaurant currently, you know, gives you no guarantees over how much work you're going to get, you would now be able to say, actually, I'm entitled to a contract that guarantees me 20 hours a week. So that's like quite a significant change for a lot of people working in the UK.
Yeah, indeed. And I suppose it really illustrates actually the whole debate over this as well, of the ambition starting in one place, but them ending up with something that's a little bit different. Let's just quickly rattle through a couple of the other changes in the bill. Sick pay was a really important one as well. What's changing there?
Yeah, this is possibly the biggest thing in the bill. So they've kind of promised day one rights, and this is one of them. So everyone will be able to claim sick pay from statutory sick pay. I mean, not sick pay with your employer, statutory sick pay from the UK government from day one of illness. At the moment, you can only get that from day 4. Everyone will be entitled to that, which isn't currently the case. And even people who are on very low pay will still be able to claim a lower level of sick pay. Before, there was a problem where people on low pay were earning less than statutory sick pay and therefore couldn't claim it, because that would give a perverse incentive to just say that you were sick every day rather than taking a lower wage, if you see what I mean. So this is a really, really big change. I mean, Labour's saying it's something like 7 million people will benefit from this. So that's another big change.
So another one, and I feel that there is just so much here, Ailbhe, you're right, is protecting workers who are fired from their jobs.
This is one that businesses take in a very keen interest in. So it's, yes, protection from unfair dismissal. Again, this is from day one. Workers will be able to make an unfair dismissal claim. Okay, basically they'll be able to sue for unfair dismissal from day one in their jobs. At the moment, there are some workers who have to wait for 2 years before they have a right to make that kind of a claim. That's been scrapped. But this was quite alarming for business when it was first outlined and as Labour approached government. So a lot of engagement has gone on with this. And essentially now that is still the case, but employers can still use probation periods. And government is looking at a 9-month probation period where that right to claim unfair dismissal still applies. But it is fair for an employer to dismiss someone because they aren't a good fit for the job during that probation period. If that's confusing, that's because it is a little bit of a fudge based off quite a lot of bartering from unions and businesses. And this one in particular is subject to consultation. All of it is subject to consultation, which is why a lot of it won't be brought in until autumn 2026. But this in particular, I think that there's kind of an acknowledgement from government that even though they're saying this probation period should be 9 months, I think that there could be a bit of movement on it. Businesses definitely want that to be longer, and they want the exact terms around this to maybe be looked at again.
So I suppose that kind of leads us to the question of the lobbying that's gone on already, first of all, because there's been so much engagement, you mentioned, from both workers groups and businesses on this. I mean, who won what in those battles when we look at what the plan is being outlined today?
Well, I think you can see from the business reaction that they are maybe not thrilled with some of the proposals, but they're holding fire because they know that this is all subject to further consultation. And so actually, rather than rejecting the proposals or coming out too strongly against them, they know that actually more work can be done between now and 2026 to get things into a position that they'll be more comfortable with. I think businesses are sort of okay with it. We've seen the Federation of Small Business coming out a bit more strongly against it, but in general, business communities, it seems to be reasonably happy, as well as a kind of quite some quite just straight and muted responses from business. But there are also lots and lots of quotes that we've been getting from CEOs who are very positive about the plans. And you can see, from some of the examples that we've already outlined, you can see where Labour has taken business concerns into account. There's also obviously the trade union movement that Labour has been trying to keep on side. The Labour Party and trade unions are kind of two sides of the same coin for the Labour movement. And trade unions are responsible for quite a lot of funding for the Labour Party, and they have this long history together. So it's been very important to keep them on side, and they were quite involved in the initial writing of the bill. So the challenge there has been really to just persuade them that even though things are looking a little bit different as they go from the initial promises to the nailed-on legislation, that fundamentally the key things are still there. And I think you do see that as well, that big promise on banning 0 hours contracts. I think you can reasonably say that that is still there, even if it's technically slightly different, because not all employees want hours in their contract. They can say that they've delivered on that. And also on fire and rehire, which is one that we haven't mentioned, but that's really important. Trade unions, I think that's one where they have lost some union support. So Unite, the biggest trade union, rejected this whole package a few months ago, even before the election, because of the proposals on fire and rehire, which they said had been watered down. And they said it had more holes in it than Swiss cheese. They're kind of unhappy with it, but actually other unions have kind of stuck with it. There have been a lot of meetings, business breakfasts, roundtable discussions, basically every week since Labour got into government, some one-on-ones with trade union people and business people to keep up the engagement. So I think that Labour plans to continue that. They know that it's a hard thing to land. But I think actually within government, there's just a huge sense of relief that they've been able to tick the box of delivering this within their first 100 days, even though it won't actually be implemented for about 2 years.
I think it speaks to the balancing act that the government are trying to weave, that you've just painted really well between the two sort of parties of business and unions, that Labour is saying this is good for the economy, aren't they, Ailbhe? They're saying it's going to boost productivity and boost pay. But really, isn't this quite a political move? Do you think it's fair to call this the government's first real major policy? Do you think we're finally getting a sense of what they want to do in power?
I think you're right that the messaging around this has changed as Labour has approached government and has entered government and has tried to improve its relationship with business. You can see that in so many things that have changed. It used to be called the New Deal for working people, but you won't see that anywhere today. They kind of quietly ditched that before the election, and it's now called Labour's plan to make work pay, which isn't what I've been calling it because no one knows what that means. They've kind of changed the naming of it. They've also used lots of phrases like this is pro-worker and pro-business, and made a really concerted effort to do a lot of the engagement with trade unions and businesses hand in hand. So they haven't really been going off and meeting with trade unions one day and then businesses the next. They've taken it more by policy issue, where they would have a roundtable on, for example, 0 hours contracts and bring in businesses and trade unions together to discuss the finer details of it. So they've really tried to do this sort of smoke and mirrors of making it about both of them, but it really did begin as just a pro-worker policy agenda, and that's really where Angela Rayner's heart lies. So yeah, the communications around it have really changed. Labour says, that most employers are good employers, that this will be good for the economy. But I think that you can see with some things that haven't made it through, some regulations around how trade unions can organise, that isn't in this iteration of the bill. And you can see from the response of some places that there's a little bit of concern that actually by increasing red tape on businesses and making it more difficult to dismiss people quickly, for example, that will actually have a damaging impact on growth. And that's definitely the Conservative argument. So I think you're completely right to say that they have been walking a bit of a tightrope on this, but I think that overall Labour feel like they have done enough engagement with business to land it.
Okay, well, we'll wait to see how it plans out as it goes through the parliamentary process. Ailbhe Rea, our Associate Editor, thank you very much for joining us. That's it from us for today. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe, give it 5 stars so other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or wherever you listen.
Our audio engineer today was Sean Guastamakia. I'm James Woolcock.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. We'll be back with more on Monday. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg UK Politics. Listen weekdays at noon on DAB Digital Radio in London.